Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott Tailford.
Hello. Josh, my friend, all sorts of things are happening with EA. Now, it seems that they, to be honest, haven't really changed. The same things are happening with EA that have been happening for the last few years. And the most recent example is reported by EvoStrix, which is a website that wrote up the fact that this dude called Kevin Ramirez is bringing about a $5 million lawsuit against EA over claiming that Ultimate Team is gambling. It's the same sort of stuff that we've had over the last few years. Yeah. EA continue to EA. And Kevin Ramirez is filing this lawsuit on behalf of around 100 players who are all sort of trying to make the case that the way Ultimate Team is set up is predatory and very much fixated on gambling and all that sort of stuff. And part of the opening statement is that EA rely on creating addictive behaviors in consumers to generate huge revenues, and that Ultimate Team card packs are predatory and designed to entice gamers to gamble. So far, so standard, but a lot of this revolves around the idea that, because he was saying, Ramirez says that he's spent around $600 in Ultimate Team since 2011, and a lot of the crux of it is that he doesn't feel like he's got anything back out of it. And EA's defense for this, as written up by EvoStrix, is that they always say that if you get something out of a loot box, any item, anything at all, that means it's not gambling because you're not losing altogether. Because as long as you can't put some money into it and lose, it therefore isn't gambling. That's always been EA's defense. And so that whole thing about like putting money into it since 2011 or whatever, assumedly, well, that is very much his choice. But there's such a loophole there in terms of how much they could exploit that, because obviously you get duplicates, you get unwanted cards in FIFA's case, or in any loot system, you get stuff that you can't use, and that's the thing that they use to be like, well, just pay again, just spin the wheel again, it'll be fine. And if those drop rates are terrible and they're not disclosed in the US like they are in China, then immediately you can see how predatory that can become. What are your initial thoughts on this particular case?
I think the loopholes are the most important thing. Like you've mentioned them there, and I think those kind of ways to get around the classifications, they're going to be the reasons why loot boxes don't just go away overnight for EA and Ultimate Team, because like you said, there are too many different things you can pin it on for it to not be gambling. There's the fact that you do always get stuff. There's the fact that you aren't able to take money out of the machine that you put in, or kind of like risk it for a higher reward or anything like that. But it undeniably uses the mechanics and the psychology of gambling to ultimately manipulate people, either on a small level or on a huge level where you're getting tens of thousands of dollars potentially from someone. Because like you said, even if you put something in a loot box or in a kind of Ultimate Team pack, there are duplicates, there are kind of tat-like calling cards or emblems that nobody really wants, but they're in there to kind of encourage you to, spin again for something you actually want. And it's not just nothing. It's not just kind of like, thin air. They're literally not selling you thin air, even though it feels like it, because nobody wants these kind of specific things. And I feel like, it's such a slow fight when it comes to loot boxes, especially. We caused enough of a uproar a few years ago where a lot of publishers kind of decided they were far too much hassle for what they were worth. But when it comes to EA, that's an entirely different story. You know what I mean? I was looking at some figures which continue to blow my mind every single time I check them before we did this news. And as of, I think it was May this year, Ultimate Team across all of the different sports franchises, so FIFA, Madden, anything else
There's
EA
one in
puts
UFC
out,
as well,
it brought in $1.4 billion just from that platform alone. So there's far too much money in this for like EA to just go, you know what, you're right, we won't fight this, we'll take them out. You know what I mean?
That's the thing that, like, from the high end, when they were put on trial and they said like, oh, it's not gambling, it's a surprise mechanic, and we all went, that just F that. I get that if you're some completely disconnected, top tier number cruncher, that you would see it as that. You'd be like, well, clearly they like it. The money dictates. But that doesn't take into account the almost the philosophy behind gambling, the potential predatory psychology behind it, and the stuff that clearly needs to be factored in. But like you said, this stuff did reach its zenith in 2017 with Shadow of War and Battlefront 2 and these big and For Honor as well. These big sort of like top tier games that were just ridiculous, just the bloat was just so like stretched out. You really had to grind through stuff. Remember with For Honor, it was like you'd have to play the game something like 10,000 or 30,000 hours to be able to get enough currency to unlock everything. Stuff like that just makes it seem so stupid. But like you said, they do make a lot of money. So I get the financial reality to try and figure out a way to keep fleecing a fan base or keep fleecing an industry's consumers going forward. And to throw another example in, because the thing is, another part of this is I think that loot boxes, microtransactions will stay, but loot boxes are, I think, very much outdated. That idea of just a random gain, because China have passed a law saying that you have to disclose what your drop rates are. Belgium have outright outlawed it, so that you can't have loot boxes at all. The US doesn't have a consensus, the UK doesn't either, and so like these things are gonna, change going forward. But how do you sort of come up with a system that is monetizable going forward, that is respectful of the consumer? To me, it would just be an upfront storefront that just tells you what you're going to buy, and you just, microtransactions can stay as long as they're not siphoning off a meaningful part of the value proposition that you're buying into in the first place. Or if it's free to play, you can free that stuff up. But I was going to mention the Avengers game, because that has paid battle pass tiers for each individual character, which I think is almost like a little spark that's just going to sort of light the touch paper when people realize what the hell that game structure is.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is it, right? When it comes to 2017, I do class that as a win, because ever since then, we've seen most of the publishers move away from loot boxes, and it's kind of a selling point now when a developer comes out and says, look, there aren't going to be loot boxes in our games. Aren't you pleased? And it's like, you made this problem to start with, but I don't want to digress.
We didn't kill anyone. You're not supposed to.
We didn't do the worst thing we could have done, so give us money and praise, please. But I do class that as a win, but like you said, we have kind of seen those practices morph into the likes of battle passes and stuff, and I think that's kind of because the laws and lawsuits take so long that we're still talking about some states kind of potentially classifying loot boxes as gambling and stuff, but most of the publishers have moved on, so it's not going to affect them, but it will affect EA. And it is kind of interesting what loot boxes have morphed into and how they're trying to spin us the same kind of spiel about battle passes, about kind of these other storefronts in the same way that they did for loot boxes, and we're kind of just like, well, this is better, but is it good? I don't know if it's good. It is certainly better, but I don't know whether I prefer. I mean, I certainly don't prefer having each character have their own battle pass full of tat in the Avengers game as I would just wanting to upfront buy the skins. And I know you can do that, but it's the fact that those systems are in place to then kind of encourage you to circumvent them by either paying real money to skip the tiers, for instance, or just going to the store directly and buying them. And I want to do a whole other video, Scott Tilford, on Fall Guys is a great game, and I quite like Fortnite, right? But the idea of having a storefront that expires kind of cosmetics after a certain amount of time. Yeah, and you put them out of rotation to kind of, jab at that FOMO of, you need to pay up now, but you might never get this Captain America skin or this Hotline Miami skin or something. I think that kind of mentality is preying on the same kind of psychological triggers as the loot boxes did, just in a way that kind of hasn't taken, it's not as quantifiable. You can't just say that's gambling. It's more of a kind of a pressure tactic or a manipulation tactic, you know what I mean?
Well, for specifically Fall Guys case, that just made me want to play more. Like, and at least I knew what I was working towards. For me, that's a problem with specificity. I think if the whole problem around drop rates and not knowing what you're going to get and just throwing money at a problem until hopefully the ticker lands on the thing that you want. At least in Fall Guys case, they're saying like, look, if you get 5 crowns or 2,000 kudos or whatever, you can get this specific thing. But you are very right that like by putting a timer on it does therefore incentivize you, and the option is right there to just buy your way to that thing instead. If you're running out of time and you don't have enough time to play, if you literally can't fit the games in to get like the amount of kudos that you need for that costume, well, you could just pay £5 and buy it right now. So like, someone over there, for as much as Fall Guys is full of goodwill and they're doing very well and the social media team are absolutely slaying it, someone over there has very much thought that side of it through as well. So there is obviously like a reality to that. But overall, I think for as much as we've moved on from loot boxes, or it feels like the industry is slowly getting there, it's interesting to talk about how like the pivot's going to be into the next generation towards battle pass stuff. There's questions of specificity and making sure that people know what they're getting, and when things like this happen, to sort of still flag them and be like, like EA is one of the ones who have just sort of done the Captain America quote of like planting themselves like a tree and just been like, well, if everyone else yields, we'll just sort of sit here and just wait this out until it's okay again.
Yeah, and I mean, we've kind of said it before, and I don't mean to disrespect anyone who plays the sports game by calling them like casual players or anything, but when it comes to kind of like FIFA and Madden stuff, like a huge part of the audience, perhaps the majority of the audience, are casual players who don't really, who don't really watch news videos about loot boxes and stuff that we do. Yeah, they don't know the Don Matrix from the Phil Spencers, and that's obviously fine and stuff, but I feel like that's allowed FIFA and EA to kind of fly under the radar and be this kind of one last standing tree in terms of loot boxes, because they're making so much money about it, because it's rarely brought into attention until you get like headlines like this, or headlines on the BBC where it's like, my child spent £10,000 on FIFA coins and stuff. And like, that's obviously very bad, but I think it allows, a lot of the media to just kind of like brush it off, because it's not in the kind of hardcore gaming sphere like Star Wars Battlefront 2, for instance, was, where that was all over Reddit, that was all over everywhere. And it's not to say like the sports games don't have passionate fan bases, but I just feel like it's not picked up or discussed in the same way as it would be if it was a kind of more quote-unquote hardcore series.
Well, it needs that like nerd hook. Like when it was Star Wars, it was like, oh my god, you've taken Star Wars and you've like messed with it in terms of, and that was the thing that Hawaiian senator called it, like it's a child-focused gambling casino for kids or whatever. And same with the Spider-Man problem, the exclusivity problem. It's like, as soon as it has like a nerd hook and you have a really passionate fan base, some people who have grown up with these characters or something, then all of a sudden it's personal, or it feels personal to those people. And all of a sudden there's hashtags and movements and things that get out there. Whereas, like you said, a more casual fan base can be exploited far easier because they aren't as vocal, because they're not as focused or something like that. But yeah, it seems like, EA haven't changed as much as the other publishers, gaming publishers have around the world. And for now, they're still very much going to exploit the countries that don't have laws in place to protect the consumer. So it's worth flagging. But let us know what you think down in the comments below. What's your general state of thoughts on microtransactions and loot boxes and the incoming swath of battle passes that will no doubt be everywhere by this time next year. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.